Well, thank you, Mike, for joining me again here today. We are going to talk about avatars, who are the people at the employer. So my name is Kevin Cairns, and I've literally trained thousands of healthcare professionals on functional capacity evaluations. I'm joined here by Mike Affleck, who has years and years of experience working with delivering these kind of services, as well as getting businesses off the ground. And what we're going to do today is one, tell you what a avatar is. We will go through 5 different avatars at the employer. So what do we mean by avatar? We are talking about how to talk to the CEO, how to talk to a union rep, how to talk to an HR manager, a supervisor, and finally the finance person. So those are the 5 avatars that we are going to go through today. And so let's just jump back a step here, Mike. So my understanding is that a number of years ago, you were working in a clinic, and you weren't satisfied with your job, and you thought you needed to do more interesting things. You took your entrepreneurial spirit on your own time, went out and visited employers and to learn more about what they were doing, and so you could come back to your job and convince the people that you work with that you could provide services to those people. And I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but fast forward. Eventually, that young Mike Affleck was speaking to huge companies like ExxonMobil. So it is possible to journey from working in a clinic to working with employers. Clearly, not everybody is going to achieve the success that you have. But would that be a fair representation of kind of your story, Mike?
Yeah, really close, Kevin. Yeah, thanks for having me again. I hope you had a good week. We're close to the end of the week, so looking forward to the weekend. I guess really why I started doing this is that as I was working with injured workers, they would often say to me, "You don't understand what I do." So here I am, a young guy with therapeutic exercise in mind, and I'm trying to get them to do these exercises, and their level of motivation may not be as high as what I thought they should be doing. So in order to understand or get them to buy in, I started going out on my own time, as you mentioned, and visited the different places that they worked. And initially I was doing that just so that I could do a better exercise program and get them back to work. But as I interacted with the different stakeholders within the organization, I found out there was other things that they needed beyond rehabilitation programs, physical therapy, occupational therapy, return to work planning and conditioning, those sorts of things. So that's kind of led me to then, starting a segment within the company I was working for, where I worked exclusively with employers. But it started out pretty simple, just trying to do a better job day to day. And by talking to people, I found out there was a bunch of other problems I had that I was quite capable of solving.
Well, that is really cool. And I think today's topic is really about how to talk to employers. And, when we say that in a really broad sense, it's like, I can't go and talk to the front door. I got to talk to a person. So when we talk about avatars in business, we talk about avatars. What we mean by that is a client or a best picture of a client. An ideal client is another way we might term that. And we do that in our business courses so that we can have a really good idea who this person is that we're talking to, and not just who they are and how old they are and what gender they are, education bracket and wage bracket they fit into, but probably most importantly, what are their pain points? Like, what is it that makes their job difficult? And in our situation, identifying the things that make their job difficult that we can actually solve. And so it sounds like you naturally kind of did that when you first started. And now that you've got all these years of experience, what I would like to do is really just kind of pull, allow our listeners to pull the future back or forward, depending on how you want to look at it, so they don't have to go through all the trials and tribulations that you did. They can take your knowledge of how to talk to these different people, and I'm really kind of hoping that we got a really good picture of each one of these individuals. So it's maybe a little unrealistic to talk about the CEO, but sometimes it's better to start at the top, right? We just kind of think, what if we started with what if the company was big enough? We talked about this in the past, you and I, but somewhere between a 25 and 50 person operation, that a CEO in one of those smaller organizations, might have multiple hats, but even a one person organization will often, quote unquote, have a CEO. So could you just think of in your mind, Mike, a CEO you remember from the past, and then kind of give us a description of who they are, and then what kind of pain points they would have in their daily life that we could solve with quote unquote functional testing.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Usually you don't get a chance to start with the CEO, your very first conversation, but ultimately they're going to be the final decision maker, depending on what you're doing, or they're certainly not going to get in the way of what you're doing. I think just before I jump into the CEO, I really like this avatar approach. So when you're going out, you just need to know who you're speaking to. There's different stakeholders. There's going to be CEOs. There's going to be union reps. There's going to be supervisors, HR managers. Depending who you're talking to, you're going to have to learn to speak their language a little bit. Not our clinical language that we have, but understanding, as you have mentioned, what their pain points are. They're not typically buying what we do, but the outcomes of what we do. So I'll explain that kind of as we go through a little bit more. When I first started out, I was bright-eyed, had a full head of hair, and probably was 24, 25 years old. And so the interesting thing is that the CEOs tend to be, they don't have to be, but they tend to be a little bit older. They tend to be in that, 45 to 60 range. I guess I'm getting old enough to be a CEO now, if anybody would have me. But yeah, ultimately they're going to be focused on the long-term profitability of the company. They're going to make sure that they have a stable workforce. They're going to be interested about, efficiency and reducing risks. They also want to make sure they don't get in the news, so they have a strong public reputation, and things like modified work and high compensation costs are going to be things that they want to try to manage, regardless of the position that people have in an organization. And this will be certainly something the CEO will be concerned about. Is the reputation clinically sometimes? It's probably not well warranted from where we sit as clinicians, but the focus is that they feel that modified work programs take too long. So anything you can do to understand that they may not be as thrilled about modified work. Not saying you change what you do, but they're going to be wondering about any sort of downtime and productivity, and how can you impact that by reducing lost time and getting people back to their regular job as quickly as possible. Those are going to be things that drive them. Because if somebody's off work for a period of time or on modified work for a period of time, they're going to have to replace that individual, and that will just be an added cost to what they're doing.
Mike, what is you've kind of mentioned this 45 to 60-year-old person. Did you have experience working in a manufacturing or construction or energy sector, a high risk sector that you can remember? Can you just tell us a little bit, something about that? Just give us one example that, maybe we can kind of paint a picture of this executive.
Of this executive. Yeah. I'm trying to go back, Kevin, in my time, because I'm thinking I'm thinking of CEOs of, the big organizations that I
Yeah,
work
like
with.
I think it doesn't have to be that, like it doesn't have to be a small organization, but even a big organization, like what is it, what is a CEO? Like just kind of give us like I think CEOs tend to be personality type different than your supervisor or your HR manager. Just give me a couple of nuggets about what the differences are in your experience and how you
Yeah,
like how would
yeah.
you approach them? Because Mike, you're really good at transforming your voice. Like how would you approach that person versus
It's yeah, role playing, Kevin. I think one thing that you have to appreciate with CEOs is they do not have a lot of time. They are
perfect?
making lots of decisions. So I'm actually going to go to the CEO that I spent a lot of my career working with. Chris was a great guy. We started at the company at the same time. He I was an exercise physiologist. He was a physical therapist. He went on to, be the president and CEO of a company of 13,000 employees. But with Chris, if I had an idea that I wanted to talk to him about, is the office that we had was on the 9th floor. So if I got in the elevator with him on the ground floor, I had to the 9th floor to kind of make my point, or vice versa. If we were leaving the office from the 9th floor down to the 1st floor. Now, you're probably not going to get in the elevator with the CEO, but you're going to have to get their attention in a short period of time. You're not going to have 60 minutes. You're not going to have 30 minutes. You might have 10 to 15 minutes to make an impression with them. So being organized before you go is going to be extremely important. So
And
you know,
what's the and like if I think about I think I really like that idea that you said that I need to get their attention. I've got 9 floors to get his attention, and if I get his attention, he might invite me into his office. So that's kind of what I'm hearing here. What for a CEO that we're talking about here? What is it that you need to say to them that's really going to allow that conversation to continue? What would you think that would be?
well, I think the pain points that they're going to be looking at is what the high cost of injury to them. So what can you do to reduce injury costs for them? So recognizing that they have high injury costs. So
So would that be
hey,
like he has to look at the books with his finance people, and he just doesn't want to see his expense line? Is that fair to say? He doesn't want to see his expense or her expense line increasing over and over and over again? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
yeah, and I think what we don't recognize as clinicians sometimes is that the direct cost of a claim. The direct cost of a claim, when we think of a cost of a claim, we often think of the wage replacement. We understand that the worker got paid, so yeah, okay, there's wage replacement, and there's the care that I provided to them as a rehabilitation clinic, or maybe it's a medical cost. Whatever that cost is, the soft costs, the other costs that go along with that injury are 5 to 10 times that. So the cost of an injury is really significant to an organization. So there's a whole bunch of different areas where that is going to be more than just the injury. So you need to be identifying that you can reduce both the direct costs and the indirect costs associated with these injuries. That'll get their attention, that you even understand the fact that it goes deeper than just what you do, that what you do has an impact on the whole profitability of the business.
And like does the CEO care about the details of how you're going to do that, or is it sufficient to say, at least in the conversation with them, we can reduce the cost of our programs can reduce the cost of your injuries? Is that maybe enough for them, and that the details might go to someone
Well,
else? Or
yeah, and maybe even a little bit more detail that, we understand that injuries cost your organization a lot, both from the direct costs and the indirect costs, things like the administration and support costs of replacement workers and those sorts of things.
okay,
And I can do two things for you. I can reduce the amount of lost time that you have, which will control your compensation costs, and I can get people back to work faster. I can reduce the duration of that modified work program. I can do that, and that's going to improve your productivity. And now, if you've done that, if they're a good CEO, they're either going to ask you how, They'll be but probably more likely they're going to introduce you to perhaps the VP of finance or perhaps to the HR manager if you have started at the CEO level. But the two
Okay.
things that are going to drive them is, I think my modified work programs are too long, and I have too much lost time.
Okay. Okay. I like it. I like it a lot. So, I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking, is that we do need to convince the CEO. We need to convince the CEO that we know what we're talking about. So I really like the idea now that we can talk about more than just making your workers better. That we actually recognize all of the things, because I think the one thing about CEOs, and that was kind of what I was mentioning earlier, is that the CEO might not be an expert and know all of the details, but they do, or a good CEO, at least has a tertiary knowledge of all of the parts. And they're going to want to not necessarily micromanage all of the parts, but they're going to want to know enough about all of the parts. And so we need to make sure that we're not leaving off a big segment. So and
if they don't have a lost time problem, or they don't have a duration of modified work problem, then you probably don't have much opportunity with them anyway. But they will know. They will have talked about this. They will have been briefed by their finance person on what these costs are.
So, like, if we're talking about an organization that's maybe a little bit bigger, not Amazon, because they don't unionize, or at least they tried to in Quebec, like, do you think like one way that this might go would be that the CEO would say, you know what, I'm not even going to bother, Mike, until you get the union on board. I'm thinking that I'm not going to invest, my resources, my finance, and my supervisor, and everybody kind of organizing this thing. I'm going to send you off to talk to the union rep. So can you think of any like union or like descriptions of unions, or how does the union, just give us what does the union do at the employer, and who are they representing, and how does all that kind of function?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I ever shared this with you, Kevin, or not. We've known each other for a while, but the very first physical demands analysis that I did, I got kicked out of the plant. And I got kicked out of the plant because it was a job that had, well, I shouldn't say it had issues, but when I went into the plant to collect the data for the functional capacity evaluation, I was followed by an employer representative and a union representative. And I had a scale to weigh things. And so there was an object, a part, it was an auto parts manufacturing facility. And so I picked the part up to put it on the scale. And apparently that was a labor job. That was a union job. And that was what they were supposed to do. So I guess the proper protocol for me was to ask the labor person to put it on the scale. And so I got kicked out. I was kicked out for all of 10 or 15 minutes, and then I was allowed back in. But they're really looking at, the health and safety of the worker. A broad stroke I'm about to paint, but as far as wages and negotiating wages, that's going to happen at, when they have their collective bargaining. But a lot of it's going to be focused on those workers being treated fairly and safely, and being able to come back to work, whether it's modified or regular work, that they're safe to do that. So
can I stop you, Mike? Is it really about safe, or is it more about fate? Like I feel like seniority, and like this is this person's job and that's that person's job. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to paint a bad picture here. I'm just trying to I'm trying to understand this union. Is it more about fairness, or is it more about safety?
I mean, sure. There's obviously those rules you have to go through, those the collective bargaining process.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change what we do. The objective data allows us to make more timely decisions. So we want to make sure that people are safe to do this. And yes, people should be doing the jobs that they're supposed to do, but they have to be able to safe to do that. The biggest thing that I found with unions is transparency. So any information that you have with regards to somebody's abilities,
Yeah.
that needs to be shared. They don't want that to be done, in secret. So, I can remember a situation where I worked with a university, and the university had 13 bargaining units.
Oh my
So
goodness.
13 groups all there to make sure that we weren't going to do anything that was going to unfairly impact that worker. So I called it my spinning chair exercise. I've done it several times in my career, but I'm sitting on a regular office chair with 13 people throwing questions at me, really to indicate that this was going to be a transparent process, that this information was going to be shared. And we're not sharing medical information. We're sharing functional information. So that's shared with the family physician, it's shared with the worker. So again, that transparency of information, I think, is typically what a union representative will want. They'll be careful. They'll want to make sure that people are doing their jobs that fairly, that this is Bob's job, and Bob should get his job back, but he's got to be able to do that work safely, especially if it's a modified work program.
And I think that's what I was getting at, is like sometimes modified work or light duties might be a coveted position. And if there's other people who are more senior, that light duty job that's been created, maybe should go to someone who's more senior first. But I think what you're getting at is you're saying, look, we're trying to do the best for this particular person. Here is what we've found. This is why they need to do this particular work. And it's not going to burden other people. And I think that was always my interest, was this idea that if someone's on light duty, that the union person was always concerned that it's not going to unduly make someone else do their job. Yes. Make them do more work, right? How is that going to be taken? Like, how is the employer taking care of making sure that no one else, like that they've hired someone else to perform?
I see your question. Okay. Yeah. So if somebody's not doing their regular job, are those other duties falling unfairly on the other workers? Is that sort of what you're asking?
Exactly.
Yeah. I've seen it go the other way too. And a nice thing is I'm using objective data to make good decisions. I've seen other situations where somebody's in a rehabilitation program and they have to lift 50 pounds on their job. They're lifting 30 pounds as part of their rehab program, part of their modified work program. It's a seasonal business, so there's overtime at this, starting in 2 weeks, and the treatment program is going to be 4 weeks before they can get to 50 pounds, and say, well, can't you just say you can do 50 pounds now? No, we're going to do this in the right manner. So we can retest them again and make sure they're safely able to do that at not only the amount, but the frequency required. Again, you can never go wrong by saying, I'm here to ensure that your members don't get injured.
Right. I think an interesting segue there is, if we're thinking about not getting injured and we're thinking that the person can't do their regular job, or maybe they're not there, that we might have to hire someone new.
Yes.
We need to a replacement worker might be the solution for that. And that sort of leads us nicely into this HR manager.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about HR manager, what are their roles, and what does an HR manager do on a regular basis, Mike?
Well, that's they do a lot of things, Kevin, that I'm not aware of. Spent a lot of time, talking with HR managers, and so one of the things, again, they want to make sure that people are treated fairly. They have a responsibility to make sure that the people that are in the workplace are able to do the essential demands of the job. That's one of the key things that they need to understand. And I've had the same sort of conversation, I'll say, off the record with union members as well. Because sometimes individuals don't become part of the union until they're, 30 days, 60 days after they start employment.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about, I think, something called post-offer employment testing and pre-employment screening, where an organization has identified what the bona fide occupational requirements or the essential demands of the job are. And then when a new hire is being considered, depending on the state or the province that you're in. Typically, if somebody you want that individual to work for you, all things considered, you make an offer of employment to them, and then you have them go through a functional test. And that functional test will indicate whether they can meet the essential demands of the job or not, and not trying to get into the political and the ramifications of the collective bargaining agreement, but then often that conditional offer can be extended or withdrawn. And so, sorry, go ahead, ask a question.
Like from the HR person's perspective, one of the reasons that's important is that like hiring is not easy, right? Like hiring people is never easy. And we don't want to have to rehire because it turns out the person can't do the job with that. Is that sort of like a really simplified version of like that HR person's concerns?
That HR person's concern is that they have recruited the individual who can do that job at the required level that's going to allow the company to be profitable.
Okay.
And there's various literature out there, but if people go through that type of screening assessment, is that, it's going to reduce the overall injury rates and compensation rates by, anywhere from 4 to 10 times.
So, I mean, if I was in a really simple conversation with an HR person, I might say, like, I hear that hiring people is really difficult. And that when you have the wrong person in the job, that also makes your life really complicated. I could solve that problem for you by getting you, making sure that you have the right person, or the person with the right abilities maybe is the best.
Well, with the right abilities, just think depending on where you're at, probably the average cost of an injury is going to be somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000.
But the HR person doesn't necessarily concern themselves that they're more concerned. Like if I'm thinking about them on a personal level, they're just thinking about their own job. They're thinking about how much work it is for me to hire somebody, and what we're trying to do in this particular instance is solve that problem for them. So if we let's just go back a couple of steps, then we go back and we think, when we're talking to the union person, we're talking about, we want to solve the problems of conflicts within your workplace between workers. And when there's new things that are implemented, what we're going to do is make sure that we place the people in the right parts of the company. And for the CEO, they're really concerned about the finance, whether it's a decrease in productivity or an increase in overall rates. And then when we shift to the HR person, we're just trying to make their job as easy as possible, if we want to think about it in those terms. And hiring less people would make their job easier.
Well, hiring less people, but not having the turnover that goes along with not having the right people. And where I was headed, I guess, to make the business sense of that, like one injury is going to cost you $50,000 to $100,000. I can put a program in place that's going to cost you a lot less than that to make sure people are safely able to do the job and can be productive. The other part that I kind of mentioned 5 minutes ago when we were chatting is unions are usually not against that as either. They would like people that are capable of doing the job when they come in. So, after the person's in there, their responsibility is to represent that worker. But before they get into the union, if there's a waiting period of 30, 60 days, they would like those. They may not publicly indicate this, but they want those people safe to able to do the job as well. It makes their job easier if everybody has the abilities to do that. But that's kind of from the HR manager's perspective, is that there's a tremendous cost with recruiting. And so if they get the right people in the job and they don't, work for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks or 6 or 12 weeks and then get injured or find out that's not the job they like. That's the other thing that happens occasionally is people will self-select themselves, Kevin.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't want to get into a job that has that much lifting or pushing or pulling or working on dangerous roads or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
But that's all kind of in the whole cost to the HR department. Is a big part of it's recruiting. It's not the only part, but that's where I've had a lot of my conversations.
Well, and again, we're not
part of recruiting and onboarding.
I think we're not here to understand everybody's job. We're here to understand enough of their job to be able to facilitate a conversation about the services that we're delivering.
Yeah,
And that's kind of where I'm hoping this conversation goes. And now thinking about the supervisors or managers, we kind of frame that just to kind of have a different the kind of person on the floor on a daily basis. Like what are they concerned about? Like what takes up their time or not their time, or what they like remove from their, or what could you remove from their job or help with their job? Like how are we going to connect with that? If we end up talking to a supervisor, how are we going to connect with that person?
Well, supervisors, are responsible for productivity. Like they're the first line of productivity. So I think I used this in the last conversation we had. If they're to produce widgets, anything that's going to slow them down on making widgets, that's a problem for them.
Okay.
So they ultimately would prefer.
So when you say problem, like what do you mean? Can you what is that like? It's a problem. What is it? How does that? What in real life? What does that mean?
In real life, what does that mean? Well, what it means is if somebody isn't at work, then they've got to find replacement workers to do that work, or they've got to convince people to work overtime to cover those missed hours because somebody is injured and away from their job. So they're gonna be, that's the interaction with the HR folks and that whole support and provision of labor to whatever the job may be to do that. So they've got that responsibility. As clinicians, we tend to talk a lot about modified duties and gradual return to work. All that makes logical sense. But from the supervisor's perspective, that just means that somebody isn't able to do their full regular job. And then they've got an administrative time to organize all that.
Okay.
And they really sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, is it fair to say that that the supervisor, because you said it right at the beginning, is responsible for productivity? Like, would it be fair to say that the CEO is going to be quote unquote breathing down their neck when they're making less widgets they don't care why. They're just saying, you promised me 100 widgets by Friday and we only have 75 widgets. So that's what I meant by problem. We like a real problem, like this is like on a daily basis that's what they're facing, right? They're facing, having to, to speak to the CEO or whoever is in charge of that kind of stuff.
And so then if somebody's injured and they don't have good guidelines to bring that person back to modified work and increase them back to their duties, that's problematic for them as well, because now they've got a union representative we talked about earlier before saying, hey, Dave got hurt again. Like this isn't good. So anything we can do to provide them with guidance on what that person's true physical abilities are so they can make good decisions on how to close that gap of, was it 25 widgets, Kevin? You said can you do 100 at 75? Like if they can't do their regular job, help me understand what they can do. Good. So I can get them doing something productive that can reduce that gap at 25. So
like maybe at least participate in producing 10.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's those, pushes and pulls that happen within an organization. If somebody comes back to work and doesn't miss lost time, that will reduce their compensation costs. But it's not good long-term if somebody comes back just to read manuals or to be, my favorite modified job I've seen sometimes is, handrail dusters. How critical is that to, producing those 100 widgets? Yeah, you've controlled your compensation costs.
Wait. The guy with the Stanley Cup guy, doesn't he wear those white gloves? And so if he was coming down the stairs, Mike, and the handrails were dirty and those white gloves got dirty and that got onto the Stanley Cup, that's a problem. Is that not a problem, Mike?
Only if the Stanley Cup's in the building. Only if the Stanley Cup's in the building. Yeah. But the idea is working with that supervisor, because graduated modified work is important for people to get back to their regular job. It makes a lot of sense. But anything we can do to help that supervisor with meeting their productivity requirements will go a long way. And then at the same time, the union's there to make sure they don't push that too far. And they're not saying that they're purposely going to do that, but that's the union's job, is to make sure the workers stay safe, so we can provide objective data to make those good decisions on when somebody can go back to their regular duties.
So, Mike, the last person, not the last person, but the last person in our model is the finance person. I feel like you've been you just been chomping at the bit to talk about this, because you love talking about
money.
You love talking about money, Mike. You love the concerns, and I was sort of steering you away, because I think HR and supervisors probably care less about money and more about their, what their day-to-day life looks like, and what kind of hassles that they have. So I think we can finish off with sort of an easy. I can lob you in a couple of questions here, but so what is the finance person? How does what we do, what kind of pain points do they have that we can solve?
I think, kind of my experience is I often ended up speaking to the finance person last.
Okay.
And the reason I ended up talking to that finance person last is because the supervisor bought into what we're doing. That was useful for them. What I talked about, they could see the value in that. The union person, I was able to convince them that this was going to be done in a manner that was respectful of their members and their associates. So that was, I got through that. The CEO would say, "Yeah, anything you can do to help me here, I'm open to that." The finance person is really going to be, they're going to be laser focused on cost control and the return on investment of what you're doing.
Amazing. Okay.
So, anything you can do ultimately, if it's going to go past a pilot or a one-time thing and you create a working relationship, they're going to want to see what that return on investment is and look at questions with regards to that. So, because
this is where you would need to have those skills that you talked about earlier, and I talk about them as skills, but the knowledge about what the actual costs, right? This is where you're going to come out, because you need to show that balance to this person, right?
Well, you need to show that balance.
The cost of your program versus the cost of what it's going to cost it. The do nothing option.
What the do nothing option is, and then for them to really understand that, okay, that seems kind of expensive, but did or maybe helping them understand that that there's indirect costs too that are 5 to 10 times what those direct costs were. So yeah, if I do this, there's all these other things that are part of that modified return to work program. Things like replacement costs, things like insurance, things like the administrative, somebody managing the modified and return to work program. So they're going to want to know all about those and make a decision of whether if they're going to spend $5,000 with you, what sort of return on investment can they expect?
Great.
And it may not have to be a specific number, but they've got to see the story and the message that this makes sense. And as you get doing more and more of this, you can start to get into understanding, the algorithms that are used to calculate compensation costs, and other types of disability costs that are associated with that. But I think that finance person, as long as you can help them understand that it's more than just the direct costs that you have with this, that'll help with the return on investment, because it's 5 to 10 times what you're charging. Okay,
great. I mean, Mike, this has been super helpful for me. I think now, if I go back and I think, if I'm talking to CEO, boss, owner, in that kind of conglomeration of people, I got to think fast. I got to think I can solve your productivity problem and your expense thing, and probably don't need to go into super detail with that person. I'm just kind of giving them some high level information, but enough that shows I know what I'm talking that I know what I'm talking about. So whether I meet them first or they're last, they're giving me that checkbox to kind of go on. The union rep, really, what I'm thinking about there is just kind of fairness and transparency, making sure that everybody that when I go in, I'm going to give them the information. They're going to have the information. The employer's not doing anything nefarious here. Everybody is kind of open. So it's kind of being really open and transparent with what's going on there. We're looking at the HR manager, and we're just thinking about their biggest pain point is having to hire and hire and hire. And can we reduce that workload? Yes, we can, by getting people. We're stopping the churn, right? We're stopping the people from, reducing the risk anyway of people injuring out, if you will. And then we think about supervisors. Supervisors are really back to that productivity stage. That's really their primary thing, and they know that their boss is going to be asking them, why didn't we produce those 100 widgets, and what are you doing to stop that? And so, our solutions in this realm here are to give them the most information about what people can do, so that they can implement those pieces, those workers in the proper places. And then when we the finish is the finance. We really are looking at getting our pencils out and explaining, here are the costs, but here are
this is the value, I think.
Here's the value. Here's your value proposition, and that they can weigh it out. And so if we can get check boxes from all those people, and I think we're in a really good spot. So, any kind of last words of wisdom for us, Mike?
I think that the only thing I would add to all of this is just ask who you're going to be meeting with before you go. Hey, you're meeting with Kevin. What does Kevin do? What's Kevin's role in the company? Or there's going to be 3 people there. Can you ask what their roles are? Maybe you've got 3 different supervisors. Fine. That helps you firm up what your messaging can be for this. The nice thing is you're using functional testing to make objective testing, or using functional testing to make timely decisions. I messed that up pretty good on a Friday afternoon. That doesn't change. You're not manipulating anything. You're just seeing, here's what the data is. Different people have different needs with the stat of what they're going to do. So just being able to speak the language of those people that are in the room with you. So just ask before you go, and then you've got your avatars to help guide your conversation, and then you're good at what you do. It'll all work out.
Well, amazing. I really appreciate your time. I look forward to another discussion. I think maybe next time that we talk, we'll maybe go through some an actual case study. Maybe kind of look at some actual number, not necessarily numbers, but what we talked about 5 times. Maybe we can actually look at what some of the costs would actually be, give it some real scenarios of here's what happens when this person gets injured, and then we'll be really thinking about the impact that has on those 5 people that we've just discussed.
Case studies are excellent. They're fun.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I thank you again for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Good to see you.